Let's get into the infrastructure conversation. This is going to be one of the biggest stories of 2018 and of the Buhari's administration. The president on Monday, January the 1st, rolled out an aggressive cross-country road, rail, and power initiative, and that's quite massive. Some of these projects will be maturing 2019, 2020, perhaps, well, outside his first term in office. That's for President Muhammadu Buhari himself. So all this needs a lot of money to finance. So we need to bring the folks who understand how infrastructure financing should go to talk to us. Let's have the first word on infrastructure fund market in 2018. Larry Buluro is the Director of Sales at Chapel Hill, Denham. Good morning. It's good to have you here. And this is the first time seeing you in the new year.
Definitely.
It's good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
You folks have been on the road for quite some time. Infrastructure is key. You folks understand what is, but give us your first word when it comes to infrastructure in 2018.
It's critical. We talk about diversification of the economy. You cannot do that without infrastructure. There's a huge deficit in Nigeria. I mean, we need about $25 to $30 billion every year for us to catch up to global standards. So that's the magnitude of the importance of infrastructure in this year. I mean, from the budget, we've seen the president and his team hamp on, really critically about infrastructure. The Honorable Minister Fashola has, a huge mandate to deliver. Same also with the Minister Amechi in transportation. Because that's really what's going to drive the economy. Roads, airports, water, waste management. It's a critical infrastructure project that needs to be, developed for us to get to where we need to get to.
Yes. The Honorable Minister for Transport, Rotimi Amechi, last week says rail projects alone will need $40 billion. That's just about, if we throw our entire 2018 budget into that, we'll say have a gaping $20+ billion.
And that's where I think the private sector comes in. I think what the federal government needs to do is to create an environment that channels private sector financing into infrastructure. The government can only do so much. I mean, from our analysis, the government can, lever up to 16 times of whatever they put in their initial investments. You're talking about almost, imagine if the government puts in $3 billion in infrastructure, and it's an enabling environment in the private sector, you can raise up to 16 times, about almost $48 billion to add to what the government is doing. So what the government really needs to do is to create, an environment for the private sector, and in which we've figured out in Chapel Hill, Denham, through our, Nigeria, the first ever Nigerian Infrastructure Debt Fund, which we launched in June this year, so of 2017. And those kind of vehicles, and the other vehicles coming, which we believe will be coming after us. But right now, we think that's a way to bridge that gap of financing infrastructure in Nigeria.
Speak to us. I'm sure you listened to the president on the 1st of January. That was last week, Monday, yes. When he spoke about the road, rail, and power initiative, which took a chunk of his address. What's your take on what the president said?
Quite very ambitious, I think. And for them to really accomplish what their targets are, what their goals are, it's going to be, take a tremendous amount of effort from their part. But we still think, a lot of the initiative that the government intends to do is not going to happen overnight. So with time, I think, if execution is key. I mean, over the years, the federal government budget has always been, this 70% recurrent and 30% for CapEx. Even that 30% of that CapEx, if you go deep into that amount, about 50% of that money is actually infrastructure. The rest is mostly administrative and miscellaneous amount of spending. In addition to that, the government actually does not spend what's allocated in the budget. Never seems to accomplish that amount that we need to do. So it's a gradual process. I mean, an example is Lagos State. Lagos State is the reverse. They've shown where in that budget, 60% of the budget, or more than 60% of the budget, goes into CapEx. And you can go around the state, you can see what's going on. There's cranes, there are trailers, there's a lot of activity going on. A lot of it, they've raised money from the private sector, either through bonds or through any other kind of lines. The federal government needs to, follow that template and figure out
Why is it difficult for the government at the center, which is the big brother, to follow the template of, well, template as you put it, of Lagos State in terms of capital expenditure spending?
I mean, I think it's the government's, diverse, needs. I mean, so we have this huge wage bill. I think
on the recurrent side.
On the recurrent side, that needs to be, needs to be handled. I think there's also, the political will to really drive, I think both the presidency, the National Assembly needs to sit down collectively and address this issue head on. So I think it's that political capital, political will to really, follow that template.
What will it take to deliver? If we break down what you call the political will, is it about budgeting process? Is it about priorities? Is it about what?
All of the above. I mean, so process needs to be, needs to be in place. I mean, not to, sound too negative. They are trying, but more needs to be done. I think the process is key. Finance is also very important, right? So I think, most of the financing they raise in the capital markets, I think 100% of it should go to capex, should go to infrastructure, and not to finance. And I think whatever generated internally, they can use to finance recurrent expenditure. We've had conversations over time on this panel, where we think the wage bill needs to be addressed. How that will be done, given we're going to a political year, I mean, there's even talks about increasing the minimum wage. So I think there needs to be a serious conversation around what we need to around infrastructure, and in the private sector, and that's very, very important, needs to be involved in this process.